We have some breaking news to report to you right now. The second round of retaliatory strikes in response to the deadly attack by Iranian-backed militants that killed 3 American service members and injured dozens more. And joining me right now is NBC News global security reporter Dan DeLuce, as well as the White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez, who is at his position on the North Lawn right now. Dan, let's get to you right away if we can. Only a matter of days have passed since those 3 American service members were killed along the Jordanian-Syrian border. We saw U.S. strikes throughout Iraq and Syria, and now we're just learning about a separate specific strike targeting one of the commanders of one of the militant groups. What more do you know?
That's right. So a defense official is telling NBC News that the commander of one of those Iranian-backed militias, Kataib Hezbollah, has been killed in a military strike in Baghdad. So this is again part of this retaliatory campaign after the death of the killing of those 3 U.S. troops in Jordan at that small outpost, Tower 22. These strikes started on Friday, as you know, and this is the latest example of that. They've targeted what they say is a commander of one of these militias that have been attacking U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria now for months.
And so, Dan, just for clarity, for those who are joining us right now with this breaking news, again, we've now learned that a high-ranking militia commander with a group called Kataib Hezbollah has been killed. He was targeted as part of this strike in eastern Baghdad. Dan, for clarity, obviously the Hezbollah about which we're speaking here is not the same Hezbollah that operates in Lebanon, correct? This is a different Iranian-backed group here.
That's right. This group operates in Iraq. It is in a different kind of status than Hezbollah in Lebanon, obviously. But it is financed and armed and trained by Iran, and it has fired rockets and drones incessantly at American forces in Iraq and Syria now, especially since October, more than 160 of those attacks. And then one of those, in one case, a drone slipped through and targeted barracks where U.S. troops are staying there in an outpost in Jordan, and 3 U.S. troops were killed, dozens wounded. And President Biden, after that, of course, vowed to retaliate and push back against those attacks. And now we're seeing the latest example of that with the U.S. targeting the leader of that militia in Iraq that's been blamed for so many of these attacks on American forces.
Yeah, this has certainly been a busy time for American forces in that region. Dan, as you, Gabe, and I have all been reporting right now, where the U.S. administration is effectively juggling 2 separate missions. One, to try to target those Houthi rebels in Yemen, those who have been trying to sort of back up the Red Sea, targeting American ships, among other ships in that region. Then separately, you have the effort to try to target those Iranian-backed militants who have been targeting American installations. More than 166 total since October 7th, since the Israel-Hamas war began. Gabe, I want to get to you. Dan, I'll let you keep doing your reporting as you stay with us here. Gabe, what can you tell us about what we're hearing from the White House right now? I know we have reached out to the National Security Council. The president, in effect, said this would be coming, said there were more strikes, and that what we saw, that initial set of strikes, was only beginning, that would continue for days, possibly weeks.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Peter. We've been hearing now for days that this campaign would continue at a time and place of the U.S.'s choosing. The administration has repeated this over and over again. And this also came the first strike came just hours, as Dan mentioned, after the president attended the dignified transfer of those 3 Army reservists that were killed in that attack in Jordan. But, Peter, right now we're awaiting any type of word from national security officials here at the White House. All we have is confirmation from that U.S. official that Dan mentioned, that the strike occurred. But again, this is something that we've been hearing from national security officials now for some time. There are several questions that we have at this point, too. Just last week, a spokesman for the National Security Council said at first that Iraq had been told of that first round of airstrikes. Then he walked that back several days later, said that that was not the case after we got a very strongly worded statement from Iraqi officials. We do not yet know if this latest strike was telegraphed beforehand to officials in Iraq. Of course, Iraq, a very complicated place, allies of both the U.S. and Iran. But at this point, we still don't know much about this latest round of strikes. But as you said, Peter, the U.S. is trying to juggle both of these things, trying to retaliate for the strikes in the Red Sea on commercial ships. We understand that those strikes on Saturday against Houthi rebels in Yemen, that was for that part of what the U.S. U.S. is juggling right now. But again, this second wave of attacks that we're just hearing about right now, just a short time ago, this second wave of attacks in direct response to the death of those 3 American service members, Peter.
And Dan, I wanted to ask you initially about what national security officials are saying about concerns about this expanding into a wider war, but I know right now you're getting new information from Central Command, the U.S. Military, about this latest strike. What are they telling you?
Yes, Peter, the U.S. Central Command has put out a statement now confirming the strike, saying that U.S. forces conducted a unilateral strike in Iraq in response to the attacks on U.S. service members, and they killed a Kataib Hezbollah commander responsible for directly planning and participating in attacks on U.S. forces in the region. And it says there are no indications of collateral damage or civilian casualties at this time. It also says the United States will continue to take necessary action to protect our people. We will not hesitate to hold responsible all those who threaten our forces' safety. So that's an official, on-the-record confirmation now from Central Command of this strike that targeted the leader of that militia group in Baghdad that's blamed for so many of those attacks on American troops.
And of course, they say no indications of collateral damage or civilian casualties. As you note there, we've been pressing the White House for answers about whether there are any civilian casualties or others who were injured as a function of the most recent American strikes in that region. It's a hard thing for the U.S. to assess, so that's information, of course, we'll learn in more detail over time. Dan, last question to you on the fear of a wider war here. Can you give us an understanding, if you pull back the curtain on some of your conversations with some of those leading officials within the national security community, how concerned are they that this escalates? The White House, I was in the Pentagon briefing, I've been in the White House briefings as well. They've indicated their desire, clearly their priority is not to allow this to escalate, but they recognize the need to strike back with additional force. How worried are NSC and national security officials?
Yeah, Peter, it's definitely a concern, and I think it's a very, very difficult line they're trying to walk. But they would argue that they are navigating this appropriately and that they're avoiding, for example, so far, striking directly at Iran, not conducting operations inside Iranian territory. And I think the calculation is that that prevents this kind of wider conflagration. But the fact is, this is exactly what the administration had hoped to avoid. They did not want to be in this position. And after Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, it set a whole series of events unfolding. And now they're at a place where they had tried to avoid still a huge amount of diplomatic effort now with Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State, in the Middle East right now, as we know. So they are hoping, the White House, that the diplomacy will forge a ceasefire deal, get hostages released, and lower the temperature for this really, really tense moment in the region.
Yeah, certainly a delicate balance that the president is trying to walk right now. Gabe Gutierrez at the White House will let you keep doing some reporting there. Dan DeLuce will do the same for us. If you guys learn more information, we'll share that with our audience right now. Again, an American airstrike has killed a senior commander with one of those Iranian-backed militant groups believed to be responsible for some of the attacks on Americans in the course of the last several weeks, including an attack that killed 3 American service members. We are going to turn now to Capitol Hill back here in Washington, where the latest chaos in Congress has moved from messy to outright dysfunctional as an election year only dims the prospects that it can get, frankly, anything done. Right now, the Senate is expected to consider an emergency national security supplemental that would strip out the bipartisan border deal that Republicans wanted and then didn't want anymore after former President Trump urged them not to support it. That broader deal, including the border, failed to clear a procedural hurdle this afternoon, meaning that it is effectively dead despite months of bipartisan negotiations and the White House's support. Here is some of what those bipartisan negotiators, including the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, had to say ahead of that failed vote.
Quite frankly, I don't blame Americans for being really angry and frustrated where we are at the border. Really angry and frustrated. But what I hear from most Oklahomans is do something. Don't just sit there. Do something. Make progress.
If you want to spend the border crisis for your own political agendas, go right ahead. If you want to continue to use the southern border as a backdrop for your political campaign, that's fine. Good luck to you.
By voting it down, Republicans will be telling our allies our word cannot be trusted. And let's be clear, they will be telling the American people they don't want to solve the crisis at the border.
Senator Patty Murray of Washington there. Killing the deal was a top priority for House Republicans and Donald Trump, who see the border crisis as a key weakness for Democrats heading into November. Ahead of the vote, the majority leader on the Democratic side, Chuck Schumer, told reporters the stripped-down version was a planned fail-safe. And in a statement, the White House expressed that it supports Schumer's plan. But even if it were to pass, to be clear, this is just a procedural vote. It would still face what is a murky path moving forward, particularly in the House, where the Republican Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, is scrambling to keep an unruly conference in line with razor-thin margins. Two sources tell NBC News that Speaker Johnson did not give any assurances on the fate of a slimmed-down bill to Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, but also did not say it was dead on arrival. This current quagmire, for lack of a better word, on Capitol Hill is a revealing portrait of confusion inside the Republican conference after Speaker Johnson urged President Biden to tie border security reforms to a broader package, then whipped Republicans against it. This was Johnson just a month ago in January. Listen.
The House has done its job. As I mentioned, we delivered common sense legislation that will secure our border. But it's been sitting on Chuck Schumer's desk for 7 months. If President Biden wants a supplemental spending bill focused on national security, it better begin by defending America's national security.
You can see the applause, but that didn't get him very far. Republicans' messaging immediately shifted, insisting that Biden could act alone and that a congressional fix is not necessary. That is an argument that Republican James Langford, remember, a conservative from Oklahoma, the top negotiator for Senate Republicans, rejected when he spoke to NBC News earlier today.
It's interesting to me as well, the House passed what they call H.R. 2, a very strong border security law, because they sensed there was a need for a change in law. They weren't saying at that point just enforce more. They're saying let's put new law in place to be able to enforce it, because they saw it as a problem. Now there's some folks saying we don't need new law at all. And my smile is, well, why did you pass that bill then a year ago if we don't need a change in law?
Langford getting hung out to dry by his party and by the head of the party, Donald Trump, on this issue. And to add to the chaos, the prospect of a 4-8 only version also comes as House Republicans reel from a stinging set of losses last night. First, as you likely saw, they failed to impeach the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. What was a dramatic scene on the House floor where the vote ended in a rare tie, with 3 Republicans joining Democrats in opposing the effort. Another Republican later changed his vote. That was done so that the party could bring the issue up on another occasion. But just minutes later, Republicans were also unable to pass a standalone aid bill to support Israel after it failed to reach the necessary 2/3 majority. Remember, Republicans brought each of these up. Pressed on the pair of failures, Johnson largely deflected and came back to one explanation.
Last night was a setback, but democracy is messy. We live in a time of divided government. We're governing here. Sometimes it's messy. You're seeing the messy sausage making, the process of democracy play out. And it's not always clean, it's not always pretty, but the job will be done at the end of the day. Look, it was a mess what happened here, but we're cleaning it up. Again, the process is messy sometimes, but the job will be done.
Keyword there, messy, of course, right? As our friend Chuck Todd argues, what's going on Capitol Hill seems to have gone well beyond mess to broken beyond all recognition. He chose some other words for it, but we'll leave you with that. Perhaps inextricably linked to election year politics. NBC's Sahil Kapoor is on Capitol Hill. Our friend, NBC News chief political analyst Chuck Todd, is here with us as well on set. Sahil, let's start with you if you can. This is a lot to try to make sense of right now, where frankly even lawmakers aren't positive exactly how this plays out. Where are we right now in the Senate?
That's right, Peter. Well, it's been a head-spinning 48 hours in the Senate. Dial back to 4 months ago, as you laid out very well, Senate Republicans had demanded border security measures be attached to any Ukraine and Israel aid. They appointed a negotiator. That bill was crafted with the help of Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader. They struck a deal. Within hours of that deal coming out, Senate Republicans knifed it and left it for dead. The vote, 49-50, realistically 50-49, because Chuck Schumer switched for procedural reasons, got just 4 Republicans 4 Republicans, after all of that, ended up voting in favor of this, and it fell far short of the 60 votes needed to pass. The names were Susan Collins, James Lankford, the author of the bill, Lisa Murkowski, and Mitt Romney. Even Mitch McConnell, at the end of the day, voted no, seeing the writing on the wall, seeing that most of his members were against it, did not want to be on the wrong side of that vast majority. What this means is that any attempt at doing an immigration, asylum, border security bill is dead in the Senate. There is no hope going forward that they will be able to put this back together, at least in the foreseeable future before the election. What's happening now is Senator Chuck Schumer, the majority leader, has moved to his plan B, which is to try to advance that security supplemental package without the immigration provisions. The Senate is voting now on the first of several procedural votes to try to move toward that package. Even that is in jeopardy, Peter. The vibes this morning among Republicans that we spoke to were somewhat positive that the border bill was going to die, but that they would be able to move forward and start debating this supplemental package for Ukraine, for Israel, aid to Taiwan. Even that is in jeopardy now. The vibes have shifted in a negative direction as Republicans have met and discussed this behind closed doors. It's a panoply of chaos in the Senate, and as you mentioned, of course, also in the House. The chaos is coming from the House Republican majority and the Senate Republican minority in an election year where Donald Trump is trying to get his way in both these chambers.
Yeah, panoply of chaos, which is a good turn of phrase, and it is a good way to try to describe the madness we've been witnessing here in recent days. Sahil, if you can walk us through this for a little bit, right? This is, I think, best described by us as an own goal by Republicans, right? Like they created this equation, and then they sort of stepped on themselves on this one as well. How are Republicans reacting to this? Earlier, we played the sound bites from the Speaker of the House basically calling on the Senate to do something just like they did.
Yeah, well, many Republicans had argued, including Mitch McConnell recently, that this would be the best and most conservative border security deal that Republicans could get. It's far more conservative than the one that was negotiated in 2013, which had a path to citizenship for 11 million people. It's more conservative than the immigration bills negotiated under Donald Trump and a Republican trifecta in the year 2018, which did include a path to citizenship for Dreamers. Democrats were willing to give a huge amount on border security for essentially none of their priorities because they believed in Ukraine aid, and they saw that the immigration politics have turned so dramatically against the Democratic Party compared to where it was before. So that's the policy side of it. The politics are very different. It's very clear that Donald Trump sees this as a political asset. For him in the 2024 election, he wants to keep this alive. It's very clear that he has strong enough influence in Congress among Republicans in both the House and the Senate to keep this issue alive.
Sahil Kapoor with the very latest from Capitol Hill for us. Sahil, appreciate your reporting always. Let's get to our friend Chuck Todd, who is with us now. Chuck, I was reading as you wrote through on this. Congress is passing the FUBAR test with flying colors. We'll leave it to our audience to Google that.
They can go ahead and Google it. Yeah, if they've been in the military, they know what I'm talking about.
But it's something beyond any recognition here, clearly. We talk about messes before. This is beyond a mess. The question isn't how do we get to this place? How do we get out of this place?
Well, I think the soonest is going to be after the election. And the reason I say it is that, for a long time, and I'm sure everybody at this table has probably had a conversation that I've had with people like, boy, Washington looks like it's a mess. And I'm like, well, there's sort of two Washingtons. There's sort of the theatrics. That's your Matt Gaetz, your Marjorie Taylor Greene. And then there's the serious people that get work done. Your McConnells, there's two Republican parties. I think what we saw last night is the death of the governing wing of the Republican Party. For now, it's sort of like they're in a coma. They've surrendered. McConnell pulls the bill. You saw what happened in the House. And then even almost the kick in the teeth was Nikki Haley lost to none of the above, right? The last standing established sort of Republican that was trying to stand up for governing, stand up for legislating, right? And she can't even beat none of the above. We've said for a long time, it's Trump's party, but he's now got it all, right? Now, and so governing is over. Do I think there'll be Ukraine funding? I do. I think the Ukraine-Israel funding, this will be the last thing. The
White House says it's dire. I mean, they're already rationing ammunition inside Ukraine.
Ukraine can't win this war this year because of Republicans in the United States Senate. Period. I don't say that as conjecture. It's a fact. I guess you could say the House Republicans too. But Ukraine could have won this war this calendar year. They could be in a better position. They will not be. The best we can hope for is a continued stalemate. And that is what the Washington Republican Party and what Donald Trump's wing of the party has done. It is dire. I think this will happen because there is a majority I mean, this is where our dysfunctional politics, there's a majority to support this in the Senate, and there's a majority to support this in the House. The problem is it isn't a majority within one party.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. So is this dysfunction exacerbated by this border debate? Clearly, this is as contentious as any issue gets. I want your answer, but I first want to play for you what James Lankford himself said on this issue, one of those governing Republicans who tried to get this done. Listen.
I had a popular commentator 4 weeks ago that I talked to that told me flat out, before they knew any of the contents of the bill, any of the content, nothing was out at that point, that told me flat out, if you try to move a bill that solves the border crisis during this presidential year, I will do whatever I can to destroy you. Because I do not want you to solve this during the presidential election. By the way, they have been faithful to their promise.
To say nothing of Donald Trump, who's been attacking James Lankford, saying that he never endorsed him when, in fact, he endorsed him and said he was strong on the border. Now he's undercutting him right now. The risk here always was Donald Trump and his sort of grasp on this party.
It is, and the problem for James Lankford is that there isn't an alternative incentive structure to support James Lankford, right? There isn't. It's not as if James Lankford decides to walk the plank, and let's say throw in Joni Ernst. Joni Ernst was another one who I used in my column. She was lamenting, but she's like, well, the people have spoken, and I've got to represent
the people. But Mitch McConnell
McConnell
used to be able to help sort of garner this, but it doesn't exist now.
But the problem is they've all seen what's happened in their own primaries. There isn't a support structure for basically non-Trump Republicans to survive in a Republican. So you're asking people, well, why won't you sacrifice your political career for this bill? And it's like, it's always easier for somebody who's not the one sacrificing their political career, right? How come you don't stand up and show a backbone? Well, where's Bob Corker today?
It kind of reminds me of the conversation about Merrick Garland several years ago, right? Where Mitch McConnell basically said, we're not going to do anything about this guy for the Supreme Court. We're going to roll the dice and see what happens on Election Day. Here on immigration, where even the Border Patrol, the folks, the union that supported Donald Trump said this was progress.
All I'll say is, in theory, Bill Clinton used Republican obstruction to win re-election in '96. Barack Obama ran against Republicans in the House to win re-election in '12. Harry Truman is the one who most famously did it back in 1948. Does Joe Biden have the ability to do it? The opportunity is there. The question is whether they can. You need a strong messenger, and I don't know if they're willing to take on this topic and use whatever little time they will put them out there on this topic.
Well, that's the challenge. Do they have a rhetorical sort of voice that can help deliver this message and try to knock it home? I was in the state dining room yesterday as the president tried to initiate that process. Let's get to our panel right now and introduce them to all of us. Dasha Burns joins us right now. Dasha Burns, our colleague here. Maria Teresa Kumar is the president and CEO of Voto Latino and an NBC News political analyst. And Sarah Matthews, who I haven't seen in person for quite some time, the former deputy press secretary in the Trump White House, joins us as well. I want to go around this table and get everybody's take on this. I think, Maria, if I can, I want to start with where Chuck ended right there, which is basically, in effect, this challenge that, like, does anything get done now? And can the Democrats capitalize on that? Can Joe Biden deliver the message that the Democrats need to do to try to neutralize an issue, immigration, that has been so problematic for Democrats? Biden trails Donald Trump by, I think, 30-plus points on this issue.
I think that's the biggest challenge, is that we have a whole wing of the Republican Party that they don't want government to work. And they're effectively showing what that looks like, that massive dysfunction. And that part of the party happens to be the Donald Trump party. So for all intents and purposes, they're succeeding. Biden has an opportunity to actually go back to the American people and demonstrate what he did when he had the House and the Senate, that he was able to govern and, as a result, spend infrastructure money in ways that we've never seen before, lower the cost of insulin. He has all these wins. But
Maria, I don't want to be skeptical, but the challenge is the messaging here, right? And as someone who's in that room every day, Americans feel like this guy, he can't just deliver it home. His people, allies, say the same thing. Can he hammer it home, go around the country and say, guys, this is a big darn deal, here's why, and they're the problem? Can he do that?
Yeah, so, Peter, I think you and I are aligned. I think that is the biggest challenge, is that he actually has receipts to show it. And it wasn't until the midterm elections that he had a lot of congressional members at the local level that they were able to sell it. And what you have on the Republican side is that you have individuals that are claiming the wins of what the Democrats did, even though they didn't deliver it. They actually voted against it. So I think we're all kind of in the same space of, are the Democrats going to be able to actually own with swagger what they have actually done for the American people? If you go anywhere around the world, everyone is so incredibly envious of our economy. We're actually booming. But if you ask the person next door, they'll say, I'm doing fine, but my neighbor isn't. And that is where there's a huge disconnect. So you were absolutely right. This is going to be very much a 2024 campaign on communications and who can deliver
That's when you need a salesperson. Dasha, let me ask you about this if I can quickly. You obviously travel around the country often. It's nice to see you parked at home for a brief break with us here. You talk to a lot of Republican voters on these issues. Do they talk to you about Congress, and when do they view this dysfunction as a feature or a bug of the system?
This gets brought up all the time by Republicans and Democrats, by the way, that they are infuriated with that institution. They are losing faith very quickly in that institution if they haven't lost it already. But when you talk about bug or feature, to your point, Maria, I think that the Democrats do have an opportunity right now. But what I hear from Republican voters, ironically, is they've lost faith in Congress, but that's partially why they're gravitating towards Trump, because they've seen him be able to, like, bend it to its will, right? And Democrats are saying, hey, where's our version of that? Where's our warrior? Where's our fighter? And right now, Republicans are kind of like, with what we've seen the last 48 hours, are like building a boat for Democrats to sail away with a bounty here. But there doesn't seem to be a captain or a map. And by that, I mean there's no message and no messenger. And that's the frustration that I hear from Democratic voters. And that's why Republican voters are saying, hey, Congress might not work, but here's a guy that can make him do what he wants.
Sarah, as we watch the challenges on Congress, I'm reminded of what happened last night, the failure on these back-to-back votes, right? On Mayorkas, the first time in, nearly 150 years, that the Congress was going to be impeaching a sitting member of a cabinet. They failed. You're supposed to count the votes. They didn't have the whip count that they needed on this. Same thing existed on the separate vote yesterday. There's a lot that Congress needs to get done, to say nothing of our spending, right, to avoid a government shutdown in the coming weeks. Do they have the ability to get this done? Can this Republican leadership team get this done?
I will say, looking at Speaker McCarthy's speakership, we all thought that was chaotic. I think that now Speaker Mike Johnson has made McCarthy look like Nancy Pelosi, basically. I mean, it is a complete catastrophe.
You say Nancy Pelosi as a Republican as an insult. I just want to make sure.
No, I mean that as
successful.
like successful.
Oh, you're saying successful.
Running operational exactly. Control, like, I mean that in the highest regard.
Oh, you're saying McCarthy better. I'm sorry. Now I get it. Yes, thank
exactly.
You. It took me a moment.
But that is how bad this speakership has gone for Mike Johnson, and that's what Republicans get by putting someone who's unqualified, hasn't served in leadership, and thrust him into this high position of power, and especially at such a tumultuous time. And there is so much that Congress needs to accomplish. And I think that the reality is, though, is that it looks like Mike Johnson is not controlling what's happening. He's just a puppet, and Donald Trump is the puppeteer. And so he's just bending at his will and doing whatever Donald Trump wants to see happen, which is not what is best for the American people and the people who voted them into these positions, into Congress. And I found it really striking, too, when Senator Langford gave his floor speech earlier before the vote on the Senate floor. And he talked about this. He said that they were sent there for a reason, and that sometimes that requires compromise to get solutions and get things done for their constituents. And I think a lot of Republicans have forgotten that.
Yeah, Chuck, I want to play for you. If I can, go ahead. No, share your thought.
I would just say, until the voters punish an elected official for behaving this way, they're going to keep behaving this way.
Well, so I want to play. I was going to ask, one of the questions is this a Republican conference that can be sort of embarrassed by a failure like this, right? And in some ways, I'm not sure that they can. I want to play for you what Kevin McCarthy was saying after Congress dodged a shutdown last fall. Take a listen to that.
Look, the priority for me is America and our borders. Now, I support being able to make sure Ukraine has the weapons that they need, but I firmly support the border first. So we've got to find a way that we can do this together.
So you are explicitly right now linking any Ukraine aid vote to a border bill. It won't be a standalone Ukraine bill?
I am telling you that the American border matters, and that is our priority, to make sure we secure that.
So that has to move first.
I'm going to make sure that the weapons are provided for Ukraine, but they're not going to get some big package if the border is not secure.
I dare say it feels like a different era. That was 4 months ago. Did you just waste 4 months?
It is astonishing. But look, there's another way to look at what happened here with this border bill. This is actually the fourth time that the right-wing noise machine has killed a compromise border deal. George W. Bush had one in 2007. And Rush Limbaugh, and back then we called it talk radio, that was the wing of the party that was doing it, and all of a sudden members of Congress were afraid of that. Then then we had 2013, the Gang of Eight. That died, yes, still led by Limbaugh a little bit, but then suddenly you had the TV noise machine participate in that. Dreamers for the Wall.
Right.
I mean, you got a little bit involved in that deal, if I remember, and it came with about 48 hours, and then suddenly Trump was afraid because the noise machine even warned him, don't you touch this, and then here we go again. Look, there is an entire industry on the right that has made the border sort of a grift. I mean, look at this nonsense at Eagle Pass. The governor of Texas picked Eagle Pass for a reason, because he could isolate it and he could turn it into his bizarre, let's have Civil War dress-up theater. He's not doing it at a real port of entry, a more serious one. He's doing it there so they can manufacture these really terrible events that I think we're all not realizing how disruptive and destructive that what he's up to now.
Let me try to do a lightning round and let everyone have a final thought. Dasha, please.
Yeah, to your point about Republicans getting embarrassed and your point about voters punishing them, there's a new NPR PBS Marist poll out today, and I found this really interesting. It said, ask voters if the political system is broken and members of Congress are the problem, or if it's the system that's broken and members of Congress have best intentions. 72% said it's members of Congress who are the problem. Only 24% said it's the system. Right? And the disapproval rate, and the disapproval rate is higher for Republicans in Congress, 66% compared to Democrats, 53%. But again, it's the message. That's the question. What you were talking about, those border stunts, Democrats did a really good job on abortion. They went to red states and pitched it as a government infringement, overreach, right? And they were able to make that message resonate. My question is, where is it on the border? Where is that on the economy? Where is that on health care?
I'm not going to presiding over a lightning round, clearly. Last thought to you. You're in a Trump White House. Donald Trump wants to be the president again. A Trump White House on the issue of immigration. Can he even get as much done as was in this package?
I honestly don't know if that would be possible, even if he were to be back in the Oval Office again, because we don't know what the House and Senate would look like. And so to get anything, passed legislatively, that would be probably rather difficult for him. And I think that Democrats right now have an opportunity to kind of own this issue and flip the script on Republicans on a topic that they have not been strong on. Look, you look at polling, a lot of voters trust Donald Trump more on the border and how to handle it than Democrats and Joe Biden. And I think that Joe Biden has an opportunity to kind of say, hey, look, we were willing to pass all of these measures and I would sign this into law. And he needs to lean in, though. I feel like he shied away from this issue for so long. He wouldn't call it a crisis. And I think he needs to lean in and be more aggressive on it and try to get something done and hold their feet to the fire.
Very last thought quickly.
So very quickly, one of the things that he did on Ukraine so effectively is that he directly addressed the American people and explained what was about to play out. He needs to do the exact same thing on what's happening at the border, because by the time you get to the border, that's not policy. That's a crisis. And he also needs to be able to divorce and talk about what happened in the Gang of Eight. That was all about the people that were already within our borders. Those 11 million undocumented folks, they have 16 million Americans who are ready and primed to vote if the president were to address their issue.
Soon we're going to be debating whether they get Social Security.
Exactly. No, it's real.
So long,
that's exactly
they're
right.
going to turn 65,
But
and we're going to have that.
But I want to put a pin on something that you said. What Republicans don't want to sacrifice themselves because all of a sudden they lose. This is an opportunity. If people are really serious about starting a third-party independent movement, that's the time right now, because there's plenty of Americans who are actually fed up with both. This is the opportunity, not the top of the ticket, but starting in congressional levels and state legislatures.
My producer colleague said 45 minutes ago we were out of time, so I'm not sure where this is right now, but we'll call it a good conversation.
It's not 5 o'clock.
I'm grateful for your company. I learned from the best. I know you could blow through a good time cue, right? Chuck, Dasha, Maria Teresa, Sarah, we appreciate all of you. And coming up, the nearly impossible path ahead for Nikki Haley after a string of setbacks at the polls, including one last night in Nevada. We break down those results next. Also, inside Secretary Blinken's diplomatic bid for a truce in Gaza as U.S. and Israeli officials reject Hamas's latest demands. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back to Meet the Press Now. I'm Peter Alexander. None of these candidates, that is who technically won the Republican primary in Nevada last night, with former Governor Nikki Haley coming in a distant second place, despite Trump not even being on the ballot. The Republican primary situation is messy in Nevada, with the party holding a caucus tomorrow night where Mr. Trump will be on the ballot. But this result was a significant rebuke of Haley's campaign, which has vowed to stay in the race through her home state of South Carolina and through Super Tuesday, despite what is an increasingly difficult, if not perhaps impossible, path to the nomination. Haley quickly downplayed the result, noting that the contest was mostly symbolic, with the state's delegates, I guess it basically was symbolic, with the state's delegates being awarded in that more Trump-friendly caucus tomorrow. Let's get to Steve Kornacki. He joins me now from the big board. Steve, what's kind of striking in all of this, right, is this means that more people had to go there voting for somebody that's not Haley than voting for Haley herself. That takes some capital on the part of those folks there. She wasn't playing for any delegates last night, but this is a gut punch for her. Walk us through what happened.
Yeah, no, I think there's no question about it, Peter. I mean, so as you mentioned, none of these candidates winning. Now, what is that? Since 1975, that's been a Nevada state law. At the bottom of every ballot is the option. It's basically none of the above, none of these candidates. And typically, that option will get 2, 3, 4%, maybe at best, in an election. Since 1975, when this was instituted in Nevada, if you look at all of the primaries, all of the general elections, all of the offices in Nevada, presidential, Senate, governor, Congress, Secretary of State, all of them. There have been, before last night, there were 5 instances where none of these candidates actually won. So this is only the 6th time that this option has actually won a race in Nevada. And this percentage here, 63%, is by far the highest that none of these candidates has ever gotten. And I think it is definitely fair to read this basically as a Trump vote. As you say, his name was not on the ballot here. And these were voters who, in very, very unusually high numbers, chose this option. It seems clear that's basically a Trump vote there. And it could read this as Trump crushing Haley.
So, Steve, to be clear, you can vote in the primary and again in the caucus, right? So Trump voters could have showed up to deliver a message to Nikki Haley and show up again for the caucus.
Yeah, and it's not so much a question. It could be showing up in the primary. A lot of this is done by mail, of course, and so you know, they could get it at home, and that's that. But the other thing to keep in mind with this, too, is Nevada, unlike Iowa, unlike New Hampshire, closed primary. Yeah. There were no independents voting here. There were no Democrats voting here. This was Republicans only. And it's what we saw in New Hampshire, where Haley was competitive statewide, but among just Republicans, she lost by nearly 50 points. Well, here there's no independents, there's no Democrats to make her competitive statewide. It's just Republicans. And this is the huge problem. This is the huge hurdle that she is yet to show. And this is the most dramatic illustration of it yet, that when you get to that core group of Republican voters, this is the level of resistance to her, and you cannot win a Republican nomination when this is what you're running into.
Steve Kornacki, we're always grateful for your expertise and for the big board for its help as well. Nice to see you. And we turn now to some of the bigger political perils that are facing Democrats heading into November. It's not just an uphill fight to hold the White House, but also the Senate, where they hold a razor-thin 51-49 majority. The map, it is brutal, simply put, for Democrats. Of the 34 Senate races that take place this year, 23 of them, 2/3 of them, are in seats that are held by Democrats. That includes the seat being vacated by Debbie Stabenow. She, of course, is from the battleground of Michigan. She is not seeking re-election. Joe Manchin is from deep red West Virginia. He is also not running for Senate again. Pennsylvania Senator Bob Casey, meanwhile, is seeking a 4th term in the state that went for Joe Biden 4 years ago, turned a red Senate seat blue 2 years ago. But 2024 may pose the toughest challenge yet for the moderate Democrat. NBC News correspondent Vitali joined Senator Casey on the campaign trail, and she shared this report.
That's the sound of one of the most consequential re-election battles in the country.
So I think when that message is delivered, we're going to advance the ball a good bit.
And today, Senator Bob Casey is getting a little help from his friend.
It must be nice to be on the campaign trail when you don't have to be the candidate.
Yeah, lower pressure. Right here in Pennsylvania, this is ground zero for control of the United States Senate in a tough race. This isn't like a race like Bob has had before.
Tell me why this race is different than all your other races.
Well, I think probably because of the scale of the money on the other side.
Okay.
I mean, you've got I've got an opponent he's worth a couple $100 million.
Yeah.
He's raised a lot of money already. That alone changes it.
Yeah. Cash talks.
That opponent trying to unseat the three-term Senator Casey, Republican Dave McCormick, who lost the 2022 Senate primary to Dr. Oz.
Together we will defeat Bob Casey.
And once again, voters in battleground Pennsylvania will be key in determining which party controls the Senate and the White House.
I wonder if you could give President Biden a grade for how he's done as he heads into re-election.
I don't want to give him a letter grade. What I do want to say is I think he's someone who has the basic integrity you'd want in a public official. He's tried, I think, working with people in both parties to get things done.
How much is Trump a factor here, though?
I don't know. It's really difficult to assess that.
It's early days out here on the trail with Casey in Philadelphia, but voters have their minds on November and the possibility of a Biden-Trump rematch.
I'm very much concerned about saving our country.
Yep.
And not having autocracy or a dictator for president.
There is this stampede of Trump, and yourself and other senators across the country, we don't hear you talking about Biden. It's all about Trump.
But Casey's more eager to talk policy than presidential personalities.
They're the party that's against the advancement of voting rights. They're the party that wants to get rid of the infrastructure bill.
Campaigning on Democratic accomplishments and priorities.
The other thing I think about as a key issue is reproductive rights. Can you talk about your evolution on that?
I have never supported and will never support the Republican effort to ban abortions.
Would you support a ceasefire?
No. And here's why. Because, in fact, I think those who, and I've had protesters as well, those who have been calling for a ceasefire should start with Hamas.
Early polls here show Casey with a lead, but it's a long way to November.
It'll be a close, tough race. But look, a lot's on the line. Every time I've run for public office in Pennsylvania, I've had to earn the vote and the trust of the people. And I'm going to do that again.
Part of Ali Vitali's conversation with the senator from Pennsylvania, Bob Casey, and Ali joins us now, as you see. Talk to us, Ali, a little bit. That was an interesting conversation. I was struck by one of the people in the crowd there, one of the black men who was speaking to Casey, basically saying, all y'all talk about is Donald Trump. It's a parade of criticism of Donald Trump, not as much about Joe Biden. That's another issue to get to. But how much does Casey rely on being a moderate in this campaign in that state?
Well, I was struck by the same thing, Peter, frankly. You walk into those rooms oftentimes on the campaign trail and you don't know what's going to be on the minds of voters. But in that room, it was so clear that they were very heavily concerned about election integrity. They were concerned about the way that Democrats are messaging out on the campaign trail. And certainly that's one of the things that they were asking of Senator Casey and his friend, Senator Mark Kelly, who was campaigning there with him, saying, can you talk about Joe Biden? And really, can you talk about the policy? Can you talk about the achievements? Something that Bob Casey was only too happy to do with them. He spent a lot of time talking about the things that, frankly, a more moderate Democrat would talk about on the campaign trail, and frankly, issues that they're going to need to be successful on if they're going to hold this seat and hold on to a lot of the other seats that they're playing defense on as well. Casey talked about the infrastructure bill that was negotiated and delivered in bipartisan fashion. He talked about the things that are needed to be done to shore up reproductive health access. All of those are key issues that are going to be at play in 2024 writ large, especially in the presidential. But Casey, again, is focused on his race. He knows the presidential is going to be happening concurrently and very much so, making the campaign trail crowded in Pennsylvania. But he was focused on himself, his individual policies, and what he has been able to deliver for Pennsylvania over the course of his last 3 terms.
And one reason that conversation was particularly interesting, especially as it relates to Pennsylvania and frankly around the country, is because the African-American, the black population in this country, which has been a strong supporter of Democrats, of Joe Biden, is a group among whom you're starting to see a little bit of erosion, certainly black men in particular, not as much black women, but black men in their support for Joe Biden, perhaps for Democrats. So that really is a population that the Democrats, and Bob Casey clearly recognizes, they need to motivate, and not just motivate, but demonstrate what they have got done and why they are the best party to get it done going forward.
Yeah, Peter, especially in a place like Philadelphia and those areas where they really do need to see high turnout of black voters. That's something that you and I know so well. We watched in 2020 as it took days to figure out what the election results were going to be in Pennsylvania. Everything hinged on that. Now you got to imagine a redux of 2020 with the presidential contest, layered on top of that a hot Senate contest that could decide control of the Senate chamber. All of that is huge. But one other thing that struck me from my conversation with Senator Casey was Pennsylvania also provided us some insight into the ways that Donald Trump's big lie about the 2020 election was manifesting at the state level. We saw someone like Doug Mastriano actually on the ballot for Republicans in the gubernatorial race in 2020. It all begged the question that I asked Senator Casey, which is, do you have concerns about what Republicans might do, saying that they won in this election, whether or not they did or not? He said yes, he had those concerns too, Peter.
Yeah, good conversation with Casey and good analysis from on the ground. Ali, we're grateful for you being here. Thank you so much. Coming up next, by the way, on Meet the Press Now, Israel's prime minister touts the Israeli Defense Forces' progress in the war against Hamas, throws cold water on Hamas's latest ceasefire proposal. We're going to have the very latest on the war and that effort. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken had another busy day today, meeting with both Israeli and Palestinian Authority officials as he tries to advance ceasefire talks and secure the release of the remaining hostages in Gaza. This all comes as we learn more about Hamas's counteroffer to the ceasefire proposal. The group wants a three-stage truce that includes, among other things, the release of 1,500 of their prisoners, including 500 of them serving a life sentence, many for violent crimes, the return of displaced Gazans to their home and complete freedom of movement in Gaza, 500 aid trucks with food, water, and fuel, mobile homes and tents for Gazans, and the development of a roadmap to rebuild Gaza in the years ahead. In a news conference today in Jerusalem, the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, signaled his opposition to that counterproposal, adding that the only solution is, in his words, a, quote, complete victory. In separate remarks, Secretary Blinken was also critical of the counteroffer, but he did seem to indicate that there was still a path forward towards a deal.
While there are some clear non-starters in Hamas's response, we do think it creates space for agreement to be reached. And we will work at that relentlessly until we get there.
Joining me now in Tel Aviv is our correspondent, Raf Sanchez. Raf, what else did we hear from Antony Blinken today, and what more do we know about his meetings with Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli president as well?
Well, Peter, we heard the Secretary of State fighting to keep hopes of this deal alive after a pretty tough day of hardball negotiations. As you said, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu calling Hamas's counterproposal delusional. And I think it was really interesting, Peter, that the Prime Minister showed up on Israeli television in Hebrew about 2 hours before the Secretary of State did here in Tel Aviv. He clearly wanted to shape the narrative to show that he is drawing a very tough line for his domestic constituency, including a lot of his right-wing voters. You heard the Secretary of State also saying that Israel needs to do more to get humanitarian aid into Gaza. He said Israel should open the Erez crossing in northern Gaza because that would allow more aid to get to Gaza City. At the moment, Peter, with aid coming in from the south through Egypt, very, very little of it is reaching the several 100,000 people who remain in Gaza City. He also urged Israel to do more to communicate with humanitarian organizations. We heard from UNRWA, this UN agency, which has been mired in such controversy over recent weeks after accusations that some of its staff took part in the October 7th attacks. UNRWA saying Israeli naval ships actually opened fire on one of their convoys carrying humanitarian aid. The Secretary of State saying he wants to see Israel do more to make sure that things like that don't happen. Finally, he also said Israeli people and Israeli government officials need to tone down occasionally dehumanizing rhetoric about Palestinians, which is something we also heard from the International Court of Justice the other week as they said Israel needs to work to prevent possible genocide in Gaza. Peter.
Raf Sanchez on the ground in Tel Aviv for us with the very latest from there. Raf, we appreciate your reporting. Still to come right here before we go. Could the Supreme Court kick Mr. Trump off the ballot for his role in the January 6th attack at the Capitol? The High Court hears the case tomorrow. The details and what to watch for next. You are watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. We turn now to a showdown at the Supreme Court. This is what you're going to be talking about tomorrow as the justices prepare to hear arguments in a case that could very well decide if former President Trump and the current GOP frontrunner is eligible to be on the ballot. The justices are going to decide whether Colorado's Supreme Court was right to declare Mr. Trump ineligible for its primary ballot after concluding that his actions on and around January 6th amounted to an insurrection and was, in effect, a violation of the 14th Amendment. Those arguments have brought NBC News senior legal analyst Laura Jarrett, my co-anchor on Weekend Today every Saturday morning on NBC, here to join me. Had to get a little plug in there as long as we're sitting together. I'm glad that we're in person and I get to interview you on this topic. So what in particular at the court should we be focused on watching for tomorrow?
So there are a bunch of very tricky legal issues at play here. So if you hear anybody tomorrow say, this case is simple, open and shut, I would be a little bit skeptical of that because the challengers here, 6 voters in Colorado, mind you, a couple people who actually voted for Trump in 2020, they want to see him kicked off the ballot and they have to run the table on 5 different legal issues in order to win, whereas Mr. Trump only needs to win on 1. What are those issues? Is he even covered by the 14th Amendment? He says he's not. He says it doesn't say anything about president. He's not even covered. Is he covered by it because he actually engaged in an insurrection? He says, of course, he called for peace. He didn't participate in an insurrection at all. And then there's an issue about who's actually supposed to enforce the 14th Amendment, Peter. It's not really that clear. And so there's a bit of a debate raging in legal circles about whether it's Congress or the courts. Mr. Trump obviously thinks state courts do not get to kick him off the ballot.
And to be clear, whatever the court says in its ruling will apply not just to Colorado, but to all states, right? So this sort of ends this story one way or another when we hear their response.
It depends on how sweeping it is. I think they understand that there are a whole litany of other cases coming behind Colorado, and so if they do some sort of narrow ruling just for Colorado, there's going to be another case.
But on 14th Amendment in particular?
Yes, there's going to be, because there's so many. They just know they're going to have to deal with this one way or another, and so they're likely to just tackle it. The only question is, do they go all in and actually decide the issue about the insurrection, or do they take like one of those procedural off-ramps you might decide and say, he's not technically covered by this provision, so we don't even have to address the insurrection.
And so how soon should people who are watching right now and have their eyes on the court tomorrow anticipate we're going to finally hear some judgment, some ruling from this?
So I am out of the prediction business because I tend to be a little bit wrong lately, and so I'm not going to come on.
But they recognize the urgency.
They recognize it because Super Tuesday is coming up in March, and Colorado and Maine, which also kicked him off the ballot but is waiting to hear what the Supreme Court does, they are up on Super Tuesday, and so I imagine we'll hear from the court before then.
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of concerns around this as well, security concerns. A lot of focus is going to be on the Capitol tomorrow and at the Supreme Court. I know you'll be standing out front. We appreciate your being with us. Laura Jarrett, thank you so much. That's going to do it for this edition of Meet the Press Now. We appreciate your being with us this hour. My friend Kristen Welker is back in the chair tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. I'll join her on Sunday on her panel. The news will continue a short time from now. Hallie Jackson is going to take things over from us again. The very latest on that breaking news, a U.S. strike in eastern Baghdad responsible for killing a senior commander, according to the U.S. military, responsible for some of the U.S. attacks, according to the United States, on American forces in that region. The news continues now with Hallie Jackson.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.